TomSito, animator, director, story artist, and college professor, has written an extremely readable book entitled Moving Innovation, which examines the beginnings of computer graphics, its recent past, and where the art form will likely be going as we move further into the 21st century. We spoke about his book on June 27, 2013, in the boardroom of the Animation Guild. This is Tom's second TAG interview. We are talking today with TomSito, learned professor and also the author of this book, Moving Innovation, his second animation book, and this one is about computer-generated animation, imagery, etc. Published by, tell me who it's published by.
MIT Press.
MIT Press. So, Tom, there it is. So, tell me, how did you come, your first book was Drawing a Line, which is basically the whole history of the labor movement inside of animation. How did you come to write Moving Innovation? What prompted you to do that?
Well, basically, the origins of this book were when I was doing Drawing the Line, and I was explaining the various changes that happen in the animation world, in not only in the 1930s and 40s, but in our recent times. I felt necessary that I needed to explain the digital revolution and about how the coming of digital technology changed the pipeline that basically, John Randolph Bray invented in 1913, and has been like the standard production pipeline till practically, about 10, 15 years ago, and has been supplanted with a new pipeline, with the CG pipeline. And then I also felt, I just felt I needed to explain the origins of these things and where they came from, and the fact that the people who are entering the animation industry now don't come from the usual kind of backgrounds of that we're used to with traditional animation. Coming from mathematics and science, and some people have done government work and all, and then and now suddenly working in the animation business. And anyway, the chapter wound up getting bigger and bigger, and so when Drawing the Line was going through its final edits, my editor cut the digital chapter by 2/3 and said, "You've got a new book here."
So how big was that chapter? That's what I want to know. You had about 40 pages?
Yeah, it was big. I think it was about 3 times the size
of any other chapter?
Yeah, of the largest chapter. And it's like, oh, okay, And then once she said it to me, I sat back and thought about it, and I thought, when I started in animation in the early 70s, I remember going to ASIFA meetings and seeing Peter Foll's Hunger. And I remember the guys working at New York Tech. I was working for Richard Williams on Raggedy Ann and Andy with Eric Goldberg and Dan Haskett and the whole team, Mike Sporn and all. And we were aware that over in Long Island there was this group called the New York Institute of Technology, and they were working on what they thought was going to be at the time the first feature-length film done by CG. And this was all these young kids like Ed Catmull and Alvy Ray Smith and Bill Reeves and all the people that later became the backbone of Pixar.
Wow, but they were in Long Island in those days.
Yeah.
This was back in the 70s.
Yeah, this is about 75, 76.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I remember after Raggedy Ann and Andy, I was working for Seamus Culhane, and as his assistant, and Seamus used to go over to New York Tech and see what they were doing, and he saw the background artist Paul Zander, working on a tablet with a digital image and just touching the little boxes that were supposed to be paint and doing paint fill programs and all, and I remember he came back from one of these visits and he was sitting at his manual typewriter, busy, it was electric typewriter, writing his own book, Talking Animals, and he was again, he was in the 70s at the time, and he looked up at me and he goes, "You know, computers are coming, going to change everything. Business will never look the same." And me, being a young guy, I was like, "That's nice, old man, lie down," you know.
And this was like what, 1977?
77, yeah, you know. But he could see. I mean, Seamus was like, he started in silent film, but he was like one of the first people to get into television commercials. He was doing animated TV commercials in like 1948.
Oh yeah, he was the first.
Yeah. So he saw this stuff and he was like, "My God, computers are going to really revolutionize our business." And then and the more I thought about it, and I thought, well, I know all these people, and I remember everything as it was happening, and I remember Tony DePeltry when it came out, and I remember Luxo Jr. when it came out. I thought, okay, I could do this. And the interesting thing is that when I read a lot of the existing literature about CG, a lot of it is written sort of inward looking. So it's sort of like the digital community talking to itself.
Right.
And a lot of it is written by technical people. And anybody who knows me knows I'm not a tech. I'm terrible. It's like I'm you start explaining stuff to me and I start fading. And I thought there's a story beyond just a dry litany of technological achievement. There's a story about the people behind everything and where it came from.
Which is where the interest is what pixel went to what pixel and what 1-2 went to what 1-2. Who really cares?
Right. Yeah. And the other thing I found was, I was talking with a friend at MIT who was in charge of the museum over there, and she had a good line. She said, technological innovation in the 20th century is a messy process. She says, in the 19th century, you go, light bulb, Edison, telephone, Bell, it's like, telegraph, Morse, When you get to who invented television, it's about 4 people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You can't point to one person and go, that's the one. You go, okay, you got John Logie Baird, and you got Philo Farnsworth, and you got Lee DeForest, and you got Vladimir Zworykin, who invented the cathode ray tube. It's like each person added something. And CG is kind of the same way. You can't point to one Edison and go,
Yeah, well, the thing about Edison, though, he was like the Walt Disney of inventors in the 1880s, 90s, because he had big labs and lots of employees, and he was basically the guy running it.
Yeah.
And
it's like, in retrospect, we now kind of figure that W.K.L. Dixon probably did all the hard work of inventing motion pictures. The first picture camera. Edison took credit for it all. So,
sure, of course.
And actually fired Dickinson when he got too uppity. So
that's right. That's right. It's just exactly like a few movie moguls.
Yeah. So the song remains the same. But the other thing I found when I was approaching this book was that it's very hard to write a history like this and just do a straight chronology. Like the normal film history is a pretty linear track. You sit there and you go, okay, here's Muybridge, then there's Edison and Blackton, J. Stewart Blackton doing the first animation, and then there's Winsor McKay, and then there's Bray with inventing the production line, and then Walt Disney, and you can follow that line. CG, it's like you pick one year, like pick 1982. You've got Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. You've got what you call Tron. You've got Blade Runner. You've got Lasseter leaves Disney right around that time. You've got Donkey Kong. You've got in England they invent the Quantel paint box and the Harry, which is an early surfacing system. It's like there's so many things going on.
Right.
The Cosmos series for PBS, Carl Sagan, some of the earliest CG graphics.
And Phil Nimblick was trying to figure out how to do the gears on Basil and Baker Street, which was the great mouse detective.
Yeah. So chronologically speaking, if you just pick one year, it's just too much. It's crazy. It's this crazy quilt. And what you really find is that in order to understand CG, it's like you have to follow separate threads. So you've got experimental and independent filmmakers like John and James Whitney, and you've got the government. The military put a lot of money in CG in the '60s in virtual reality for flight simulators.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
They wanted their jet planes. So when you got into a simulator and you turned the wheel of your plane, the landscape moved in real time. To your controls, and
sure.
They wanted that to happen. So they had the money to burn in the '60s when a lot of Hollywood studios, like this high period of the space race and the Cold War, when the government had an open pocketbook, Hollywood is going through its nadir, where the big studios are breaking up and being sold off to conglomerates.
20th Century Fox is becoming is selling off their back lot for high rises and all that stuff.
So the idea of like what scientists call blue sky research, which is where the word blue sky.
An irony.
Yeah, that's where it comes from. And but blue sky research means you go to them and you say, give me a grant of $4 million and 2 years, and we'll come back in 2 years, and we might bring you something really cool. It may not be what you want.
Or not.
Yeah, or not, but it'll be really cool. And Hollywood studios like, what? Get out of here.
What are you talking about?
What the hell's wrong with you? Yeah. I mean, and some of these guys told me about how they and their professors would go on summer break from studio to studio pitching the idea of computer graphics. And the studios would listen and just go, get out of here. It's like, I'm not going to waste money on that. It's too expensive and weird. And, like even in the early 80s, when you had companies like Digital Productions here in Hollywood and all, and they were warned, don't put the word digital in your studio title, because people are afraid of it. They think very expensive and it doesn't look good.
It's probably like the close cousin of trying to pitch sound in the 1920s.
Yeah.
We got a good thing going here. We don't need this.
Yeah. Who was it that was the one mogul said, who wants to hear actors talk?
Yeah. I think that was might have been Sam Goldwyn, but who the hell knows?
Yeah. I mean, Sherry McKenna, who was a producer at Digital Productions and Bob Abel in the 80s, she told me, she says, my final victory is I can go outside right now and stop anybody on the street and say, do you know what CGI is? And they go, yeah, computer graphics. You go, in 1984, nobody knew what you were talking about. It was like Flash Gordon time. It was like completely crazy.
Oh yeah, completely.
Yeah. So those lines. So what I find fascinating is you have all these individual lines of like the government, experimental film, motion picture visual effects, people working in architecture, in medical visualization, in high academia, but they're all on separate tracks. Like they're all not talking to one another. I mean, like if you remember, like if you used to go to film festivals in the late '70s and early '80s, like Filmex, always like at the end of the evening there'd be the computer film, around 10:30 or something when everyone wants to go home, and you talk to the computer people, and they were really kind of out there on their own. They had the Preston Blair book, and they're trying to figure out animation, and all these individual threads are moving independently of one another. And then around the late '80s is when the conversion started to happen. I think with the vertically concentrated media conglomerates, kind of like combining all this stuff, and also combined with the advances in the technology, like Alvy Ray Smith, who was one of the pioneers of surfacing, software and all, told me. He said the basic tools of CG were invented between like 1976 and 1982. That's when they came up with the basic tools that we were all going to use. The next 10 years was increasing the power of things so that you could actually like do complicated graphics.
Not wait for 5 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, there's scenes even on the Iron Giant where it took like 48 hours to render one scene. Like it would take that long. It's a 24 hours period for one scene to render was like nothing new. So it was that, and also making the tools friendly enough so that artists could use it. So you don't need a PhD just to turn the damn thing on.
Right.
You could figure it out.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that was really like the 80s. To the late 80s was everything getting easier. Like the first movie to use all CG as in its visual effects, the Last Starfighter, done in 1984. They had two large computers with a combined power of 24 megabytes. So they made the whole movie on 24 meg.
Probably took them a little bit of a time, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And you see it today, and it's not bad. It holds up. It's a good little.
Yeah, but you look at glass shots, you look at analog, you look at the process work in the films from the 30s or the 40s. You look at early Technicolor. You go, it works for its purpose at the time.
Yeah.
They figured out how to do it so that the audience would buy it.
Yeah. One of my favorite little stories was a story that Doug Trumbull talked about on the original 2001: A Space Odyssey. There's a shot of where the HAL supercomputer, the HAL computer, is telling the astronauts that the satellite dish on their spacecraft is going to fail, and they're going to lose communications with the Earth, and you need to go outside and take a look. And you could see Keir Delay looking down at this TV monitor, and there's a perfect vector wireframe of a satellite dish turning in 360. And it just looks like a computer graphic. It's a vector image computer graphic of a wireframe of a satellite dish. The way that was done in 1967, 68 was it really is made out of wire. Trumbull actually he had built a miniature of the spacecraft, because calling it a miniature it's like 6 feet long. It's huge.
Yeah,
it's a huge thing. But anyway, he made a satellite dish out of chicken wire, sprayed it white, put it on a record turntable, and they turned it and took sequential photographs.
Stop motion.
Yeah. So they took codoliths, the sort of like photographic images as they turned it slowly, and then when they had enough, then they processed these things high contrast, and then put them underneath an animation camera, and then took that and optically printed it in the screen. And you look at it now, and it looks like a computer, and and it's completely. It's complete bull. It's complete make believe, but it looks like a computer. So, what the heck?
Hey, if it looks like one, then it is one.
Yeah.
If a hanging miniature looks like a city, it is a city.
Yeah. And it's funny, because when Kubrick was starting the project, he and Arthur C. Clarke were still writing the script, whatever, in a hotel room in Chelsea in New York City. One of the early meetings he took was John Whitney Sr., who was considered one of the fathers of computer graphics. And John Whitney had been doing experimentations with analog devices since the 50s. And he came in and basically pitched the idea of, you should do all the effects on this on computer. You should do the whole thing. Like the monolith shouldn't be a real object. It should be it should be a computer graphic, vector image.
Which in fact would be the way they do it today.
Yeah. But at the time, Kubrick just couldn't see it. He listened and was polite, but he was kind of like, it's just.
It would have been tough to pull off, because I don't think the technological infrastructure was there.
Yeah.
To do all of that work.
Yeah. Again, at that time, the most advanced stuff was the government. Like one of the earliest digital films in 1961 was this thing. It's like I can't even recite the title. It's so complicated. But it's like 2 gyro navigational systems. It was a film done by Bell Telephone to explain how satellites can go around the Earth and still keep one side pointed at the planet constantly to bounce off radio waves.
Oh yeah.
So it's a very early digital like square, cube going around the planet, and it's simple, but it's the first one.
And the other thing, because you go into this in great detail in the book, at the same time you've got movie graphics and computer animation sort of moving to some sort of fruition with early work. Mm-hmm. There's also video games and arcade games that came in. Talk a little bit about that, because that was kind of on the same track.
Yeah. It's that of course it's funny how today people kind of in their minds they kind of divorce computer graphics, meaning like things from movies or TV or animation, from games. But I mean, it's graphic. It's all graphics. It's still moving graphics.
A lot of it all comes from the same software and hardware, especially now.
Yeah. And again, a lot of the earliest the earliest games were originally flight simulators for the military. That if somebody was working on a simulation, for us pilot training thing, and that very easily turns into a first person, sort of flight game.
And they had it on Apple II, right?
Yeah. In fact, the guy who developed that, I think originally was working on flight simulators for the Air Force, and then just took the same software. But I mean, there were people experimenting with making games as early as the 40s. Like Alan Turing, who's considered one of the fathers of the computer, was trying to work out a chess or checkers game with a computer that early. And in the early 60s, there was some MIT students who developed this very early game called Space Wars, which was basically like a spaceships shooting one another and all. It was very popular in the early 60s. But really, the thing is, nobody could see a financial use for it other than as a demo for the large computers. Because in those days, like in '62, you had to be connected to a mainframe, which was a computer the size of a bus. It's like this enormous thing.
Oh yeah.
But they did invent the first joystick consoles because they wanted something that you could hold in your hand while you're operating the game. But it still had to be connected to a supercomputer. In fact, in an early experiment with one of these things, they had one in the coffee shop at Stanford University, the Treadsitter coffee shop, and they had an early computer game. But then what happened was that from the monitor, the wires went out of the game, along the floor, out the window, across the way up to a second floor window connected to the supercomputer. In the lab.
So it only looked like it was this little mechanism.
It was actually this enormous thing, And when people talk about like Nolan Bushnell and Atari, one of the things that Nolan Bushnell was known for was that he was like one of the first people to boil down all this technology, like miles of spaghetti wiring and circuit boards and everything, to something that was manageable, actually something like the size of a large TV set. And that would be like that was Pong. That was like the first game around 1972. But the same sort of, the same sort of...
And very popular.
Yeah, it was a big deal, And the famous story about Pong was you could operate it with one hand while holding a beer in your other hand. So.
Well, it was de rigueur in a lot of bars all over America, right?
Yeah.
Where you'd sit at your table in front of a long bar and play your game and order your shots.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So that's where a lot of this stuff happened. Just like Donkey Kong started that way too. It started originally as a bar outside in Seattle, very close to the University of Washington. The company that started it was Nintendo, and Nintendo had begun in the 19th century as a company that made hand-painted playing cards. It's called Hanafuda cards, and they're very popular with the Yakuza, with the Japanese mafia, because it's very sort of ornate kind of like.
Well, they were still in the game business, so they just moved to electronics.
Yeah. Then in the 50s, they saw the Pokino games, those one-armed bandit electronic things, and they shifted over to that around 1956. But then after seeing Pong and those things, they thought, well, we'd like to do games, sort of thing, and there's got to be a way we can break into the American market. So there was a designer named Shigeru Miyamoto, and they originally went to him, and he was a big fan of Popeye and Olive Oyl and Bluto cartoons. Like, he loved Popeye cartoons. And the thing about Popeye is that you have the little man, and then this big ape-like big guy kidnaps his girlfriend.
Bluto.
Yeah, Bluto. And then the little man has to save him. And even though it's violent, it's not scary violence, it's funny violence. So it's comical violence. So he thought it'd be fun to do a game that where there's a lot of action, but it's not like deadly action. It's just kind of fun. So he changed the big guy into a gorilla, and then had the little man's kind of like trying to chase him. And his supervisor said, well, the Americans won't go for it unless it has a good name. It needs a catchy name. He says, well, what are you going to call it? He goes, well, Stubborn Gorilla. And he goes, well, what's that in English? And he goes, I don't know, I don't speak English. And he goes, well, here's a dictionary, figure it out. No Babel fish back then. So, you had to look things up in a dictionary. So he looked up in the dictionary, gorilla in Japanese is Kong. And then he was looking at synonyms for, words for stubborn. Yeah, and came out donkey.
Stubborn as.
Yeah, stubborn as, yeah. So he called it Donkey Kong. And when they sent it to America, their American distributors immediately said, absolutely not. That's the stupidest name I ever heard. I hate that name. Even my lawyer doesn't know what the hell that name means, So, but I said, no, tough. We're going to stay with it. We like this, And then they set up like one demo game at like a student, hangout outside the University of Washington, and it just exploded. They said that the game was broken. It was choked with so many quarters, and there were people lining up at the bar in the morning just to play the game. Never mind to have a drink, and that's when they thought, okay, I think we got something here.
So then they started making duplicates.
Yeah, and it's interesting because again too that there's that same sort of parallel kind of evolution of like going from games to the other CG stuff. But then and then now in our modern day, you have a lot of people moving back and forth between working in games and working on theatrical productions or television.
Because the software is the same.
Yeah.
Hardware is the same. Skill sets for the artists are many times the same.
Yeah.
So
it's still the same sort of animated acting and performance, and also and cinema. And it's like you're still telling a narrative story. The same way.
So games and theatrical and television CG animation sort of rose on the same track, not at exactly the same time, but.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a big crash around 1983. When up to that point, most games were connected to your TV set, because home computers hadn't really kind of come on. They were just starting to come on, but they weren't really ubiquitous in people's homes the way they are.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember, in 1990. My wife Pat saying to me, maybe we should get a personal computer. And I'm like, what do you do with it after you do your income tax? Like, okay, I'm wrong, all right. So but
so you got one in 1982.
Yeah, that's it. So, but back then and everything was connected to TV sets. In some cases, you actually had to like rewire the back of your TV to hook up the game, and you couldn't watch TV shows while the game was playing. And I think parents, it got old with them really fast. It's like I can't watch my ball game, or I can't watch this because you're playing the damn game all the time. And like you were saying about the duplicates, was that there was a lot of bootlegs, and there was a lot of copies and companies ripping each other off, and there was a lot of low quality games kind of like flooding the market, and this caused like a big turn down, and this was right around the time that the He-Man craze started, and He-Man and Gem and G.I. Joe, because remember when video games were hot, everybody was saying that's the end of toys for kids. There's going to be no more Barbies and no more Easy Bake Oven and no more G.I. Joe, because everybody's just going to play games all the time. And what happened was the public reached a saturation point, and then you had something like He-Man, which was just good guy, bad guy, no instructions, no rewiring, no batteries. You just have good guy, bad guy, hit them together. And that became a gigantic hit. People turned away just as quickly, and there was a big sort of like the bottom fell out of the video market, and Atari almost went under, and Coleco and all these different companies. Coleco's, I think it was saved themselves by doing Cabbage Patch dolls, and all that became a hit.
Yeah, but like Nintendo went into the toilet, and Atari went into the toilet.
Yeah, Atari did. Like most of the American games companies did. The Japanese companies, it paralleled in Japan. They had the robust Japanese economy over there, and they were much more conservative in their business approach. So they actually weathered the collapse pretty well. And then Nintendo at a certain point said, okay, we're going to focus on personal computers rather than, and the heck with TV, video games.
Yeah.
So we're going to give up. We're going to cut bait on the TV, and we're going to focus on the personal computer, which was just beginning to enter people's homes in big numbers. And so that's why Nintendo became like the domineering partner at the time. One of the other connections too was that there was a guy in the Soviet Union named Alexei Pajitnov, and right around this time, he invented the game Tetris.
Oh.
Remember Tetris? That's the little blocks falling. And the thing is that it has no cultural bias. It has no language problem. It's got nothing you need to understand. It's very gettable. So people all around the world could just like play this game, and it's a very simple game. And when the first Game Boys were created, also with Nintendo, they put Tetris in Game Boys. And if and then pretty soon, like if you're riding on a streetcar in Buenos Aires or in Jakarta or in wherever in Tel Aviv, instead of people with newspapers, you'd have Game Boys with Tetris.
Yeah, I remember when Game Boys were. I mean, the younger kid was back there doing his, this is with that little controller, that little cross-shaped controller.
Yeah.
Couldn't get his face out of it. That was the problem.
Yeah. And you see that's the stuff that always fascinated me. It's like the things that hit that big. They're like, why did this hit so big? You're like, why did that make it and other things?
It's hard to say. Why one thing makes it, one thing is like, and the next thing misses.
I mean, in retrospect, it's easy. I mean, it's very simple to go, oh yeah, well, Civil War, yeah, we win. Lincoln got shot, but we win. It's like, it's easy to say it afterwards. Well, just like like the success of Pixar. It's like the people who were working at Pixar before Toy Story said they almost went under like about 9 times.
Sure.
For a long time they were living.
If not for Steve Jobs' checkbook.
That's it. It's that all those shorts like Luxo Jr. and Knick Knack and stuff. They were great at film festivals and they won a lot of awards. But in the end, Steve had to open his checkbook and keep the lights on.
Yeah.
They weren't bringing any income in.
Right.
And you think about it, when Steve Jobs bought Pixar in 1986, the idea of animated films making gigantic box office returns and bringing in billions and all was still 10 years in the future.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, films like Great Mouse and films like Oliver and Company, they did well. Oliver and Company did like 46 million or something.
Yeah. And Bluth was making films. He was making the Feifel movie and
the American Tail,
the Dinosaur Land Before Time, and all that good stuff. So he was
they did okay,
clicking right along, and they were rivals for 3 or 4 years, where they were both making pictures that were doing 50 and 60 million at the box office and making profits.
Yeah, and at the time, and that year, like 1986, whatever, like almost like no studio outside of Disney was making a significant profit. It was certainly not the kind of profit Steve Jobs was used to, with an animated film, and all. It was just pie in the sky stuff. I said Bluth was successful. He had the connection with Spielberg also, because Spielberg produced American Tail and Land Before Time, and but the track record of outside studios making that kind of money was pretty poor at the time. So Jobs was really taking a risk, and it's interesting that Doug Norby, who was the executive who worked out the deal between Lucasfilm and Jobs, had already had mentioned after the fact that if the sale to Jobs hadn't worked out, he was going to close Pixar and lay them off, and just get rid of them. Yeah, so they got that close, to going under. Just like right around the time Toy Story was nearing completion, it's in Isaacson's book about Steve Jobs, that Jobs had started to quietly look around for a buyer for Pixar, because he had dumped $50 million into it and never heard it hit bottom. It hadn't really gotten anything back yet. So he was secretly talking to Microsoft. But then the first results of screenings came in, test screenings on Toy Story, and they said, no, this thing's going to do well.
That almost exactly tracks Blue Sky, because a friend of mine, Chuck Richardson, was an executive back there, and I went back to see them when they were doing Ice Age.
Yeah.
And they were on 3 floors of the IBM building in White Plains, next to a mall. And Chuck said, well, we're about 2/3 the way through, but Fox is out looking for buyers for this place, because they don't want to be in the animation business. What happened there was the first trailer hit in Europe, with Scrat,
Yeah.
And got huge reaction, and Fox went, put a hold on that. Let's see what happens. But same exact thing.
Yeah.
They just thought there's no future here for us, and we're going to dump it.
Yeah.
And then change their mind.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. Is that animated features specifically are real high stakes game. They win really big. And when they don't win and stuff, the collapse is big. Like Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within. The one that was done in Honolulu. Yeah. I mean, you could have a bomb just as quickly. But at the time they were doing Toy Story, like one of the other issues they also had was, whenever people thought of CG, this is like in the early 90s, you thought killer cyborgs or spaceships or targeting systems for laser weapons. You didn't think warm, cuddly Disney characters, like charming Disney characters that everybody will want to have toys of. And John Lasseter actually had to rush through a scene of Woody and Buzz having an argument with one another, the other characters, to kind of prove to all the execs that, like, no, this is going to be like Disney. This is going to be like good Disney animation. It's not just going to be robot-looking, cast iron characters. It's going to have a warmth. I think what one of the things that John did very well, Lasseter did very well over there, was that he worked with the limitations of the medium at that point. Because the scientists were all for, let's do full-on realistic human beings,
which wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, they look bad, and John understood, okay, we have problems with textures and flesh and characters, toys. It's like hard shell, it's like shiny, and then if you have trouble with characters with weight, characters making contact with the ground, fish. They float, bugs. It's like you're working within the limitations of the medium.
Yeah.
And they didn't really attempt full-on human beings, until Incredibles. And then the idea was that instead of trying to do photoreal human beings with every
caricatures.
You go back to 101 Dalmatians and Brom Bones and Ichabod, and it's like they're human, but they're stylized human beings.
Yeah.
And it looks good.
Well, it's just, mocap, and we'll get into that, has just never quite clicked with an audience, and I think it's because viscerally it creeps them out.
Yeah.
I'm looking at something that's almost alive.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the Final Fantasy stuff, they put like liver spots, and they put like pores, and they put eyelashes, and they work really hard. All the hair and stuff like that. It's just incredibly hard to do. But the end result was it creeped people out. It's like it was too close. There's the uncanny valley concept,
right?
Which was it was a Japanese scientist named Mori who speculated about this in the 70s, and he said the reason why we like R2-D2 or like the robot from Lost in Space or C-3PO or something is that they're robot characters, but they're acting like people. But when the androids get too close to a human being, it's creepy. And just a little too much.
Well, I think that's why the aliens work in Avatar, because they're tall and they're blue and they're not human.
Yeah.
And so you don't have any point of reference.
Yeah.
If you try and make a human in CG land, well, we all know what humans are like.
Yeah.
We deal with them, we live with them, we have families of them.
Yeah.
So even if you get really close, everybody goes,
yeah.
A real human on film is one thing, but a human that's been developed CG-wise, it can never quite merge with the real thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like when you're a kid, and your mom buys you like a ventriloquist dummy or something, like a Jerry Mahoney or something like that. After a while, you're a little creeped out by it. It's kind of like.
That's why Twilight Zone did all of those dummies that are alive episodes.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere, heard somewhere that in an early version of Toy Story, they were thinking of doing a ventriloquist dummy for Woody, and everything, and they just decide no, it creeps people out. It's too
just
much.
like, remember Chucky, all
Yeah.
of those.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, when you talk about mocap and stuff, I like the character work in iRobot, the Will Smith thing, where they're humanoid looking androids, but they're still very, they look like those model those posable model figures that you buy in art supply stores. They were still very, machine, robot looking with natural.
Well, people
faces.
buy that.
Yeah, and it worked. It was a very successful design, I thought.
But when you try and do, that's why I think all the stuff that Robert Zemeckis did, as much work and effort and time as they put into that, it isn't animation, and it's not live action. It's kind of that uncanny valley middle ground that people just, the eyes are dead, and that's what I think Tintin, when Spielberg did it, if he had done that as just a straight ahead keyframe animated film, I think it would have been more accepted than
it's
the
true.
way they did it.
Like we know from doing 2D animation rotoscope, it's you go back to like Gulliver's Travels and the Fleischer Superman. The best mocap is when you work with the live action, but then you go beyond it. Ollie Johnston used to say, good animation. Well, he said Disney animation, but to him, the only good animation was Disney animation.
And he was probably right in his time.
Yeah, but he said Disney animation is not about copying life; it's caricature of life. It's life plus.
Yeah.
So you have to take it and you have to push it a little bit. And I think the people working the mocap on Lord of the Rings and all, they had some very strong keyframe animators on that. It's a very good, Richie Bainham and Pat Hanaway and Andy Schmidt. They had some excellent keyframe people. Randy Cook, also Disney trained, and working with the mocap, but then sort of like working with it, but then going beyond where they had to. And like I was told that a lot of the great facial work on the Gollum, what they call the soliloquy sequence.
In Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, in Lord of the Rings, yeah. The scene where the Gollum argues with himself whether or not to kill the Hobbit. Master loves us. Nobody loves you. It's a beautiful scene, but it said a lot of the faces that were keyframed. Because it's just that the mocap technology wasn't subtle enough yet to really capture what the actor was doing. And it's just it's a difference of interpretation that you had to go a little beyond that to make it work. And I think WED has been very successful with making that sort of leap of you expand where you have to, which is again what the Fleischer animators knew back on Gulliver's Travels.
Yeah, well, and Snow White.
Yeah, it's true. It's the same thing. It's like they would use the roto model, but they would quickly leave it. As the animation evolved, you would use it as sort of like signposts to the road that you wanted to travel. Now, an interesting thing about motion capture, too, was that, when I started exploring the roots of motion capture, people would say, well, okay, PDI, Pacific Data Images, in 1989, did a thing for the Jim Henson show called Waldo C. Graphic.
Yeah.
And it was the first, they had the Waldo harness, which is the big harness with all the wires coming out of it, or the sensors, and everything you did, the figure did. So talking to the artists who worked on that, I said, well, where did you get your ideas from? Like where did that come from? And then you traced it back further, and they were experimenting with this kind of stuff in the 60s. And I said, you actually have to go back to Ask Mr. Lincoln and the Disney audio animatronics. Because like Wattel Rogers, who was the engineer at WDI, had a harness with the wires coming out of it, and everything that he did, the Lincoln animatronic did, and it was recorded onto tape. Bill Justice, who was Disney character animator, was there overseeing the lip sync and all, and it's the same kind of idea. And they said that they got their stuff from the government, from the Air Force, because Disney and the Air Force had a very good relationship through the 50s, doing programming, training films for them and all. So whenever any kind of technology was being declassified, Disney would usually get first crack at it.